Stone Brothers production.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to our serial killer series from A through Z. Sorry for the long delay as both our schedules have been crazy. Today on our list, it's Maryland, and soon in the future, we're going to start filming at abandoned locations to have a mix in our videos. Be sure to like, share, and leave comments below as everything matters when it comes to the adpocalypse. Thanks for listening, guys, and let's get right into our list. This is 6 serial killers in Maryland. Number 6. Josephine Victoria Gray.
Josephine Gray believed she had special powers and made others believe it too. She considered herself a voodoo queen, and her whole world is dedicated to black magic. She controlled a lot of people with her belief, and did so out of fear. In 1974, her first husband, Norman Stribling, would fear her power and found voodoo passages which he thought harm would come to him. He saw his name written down on a piece of paper with other ingredients in some voodoo concoction to kill him. Her real power wasn't magic because it was led from a gun, and she continued to portray herself as some mystical voodoo queen. She held Norman at gunpoint, aiming it at his head, and pulled the trigger. His body was discovered in the morning alongside a road. Norman gave her a nice life insurance payout, which was enough for a new start with her secret lover. Cops had a feeling who the killer was, but they had not enough evidence and tips from witnesses because everyone was afraid from her. Families were afraid that she would seek revenge on those who crossed her. Robert Gray and Josephine stay together for 15 years before she starts to get bored and move on to another guy named Clarence Good. Yet again, she used the new lover to get rid of her old lover, and he became her new husband. Both Josephine and Clarence find Robert on the road, so they drove up on the side of him. Once they were right next to him, Clarence popped up with a gun, and Robert didn't expect it. Robert stopped and reversed to get away from the two just in time. Josephine's own son went to the police and feared for Robert because he knew his mom was trying to kill him. Police had no time to save Robert as he was killed with a .45 caliber pistol when he was trying to hide in a room where he resided. Now with another death, Josephine receives another insurance payout. At this point, Josephine's own family believes she killed both men or had gotten her lovers to do it for her. She was even feared by her own family because she threatened them with black magic. Detective Joseph Mudano was on the investigation and was determined to break the case. He appeals to what he believes will be her next victim, which is her current lover, and even tried to convince him that she kills her lover every time she gets sick of them. He didn't want to hear any appeal that Detective Mudano sent him, and he was found 6 years later in 1996. Once Josephine found out Clarence had her on his $100,000 life insurance policy as a sole beneficiary, she shot him in the head. One way to catch Josephine was to charge her crimes for fraud for the insurance claims on their lives. To help build their case, investigators got in contact with her most recent lover, Andre. Andre told investigators she bragged to him about killing her past lovers and even flaunted her .45 caliber pistol around him. Police convinced Andre to testify at Josephine's trial by stating she could be taking out a life insurance policy on him as well. In state trial, only one murder case can occur at a time, but the federal fraud case changed the course to have all 3 instead. In 2002, the jury found Josephine guilty on all 8 counts of fraud, and she was sentenced to 40 years behind bars with no chance of parole.
Number 5. Geraldine Denis Parish. Geraldine Parish was a self-ordained storefront preacher from East Baltimore. Many people thought of her as a sweet, caring shepherd of her church flock, but that wasn't the case. Others were deeply afraid of her voodoo methodology and thought a darker side lays beneath her exterior personality. Parish married up to 8 men in an 18-month period. She was convicted in 1989 for arranging the murder of her 4 friends and relatives. She did this to cash in on their insurance policies and was convicted in the botched attempted murder of her 29-year-old niece. Throughout her niece's childhood, Renee Burns would quietly listen behind the doors when she was supposed to be asleep. She would hear family members whisper rumors about the sinister things Aunt Geraldine Parish had done. When Renee got older, she was taken into the confidence of evil Aunt Geraldine. After some talk, Renee realized for the first time that many of the family's accusations of murder for insurance became true, as she was under her wing but had no proof that she committed murder. She did believe her aunt lived very well off insurance benefits from each of her victims because she always had large sums of cash, nice clothing, flashy vehicles, and a luxurious lifestyle she would continue to live. Renee said those reasons made her decide to adopt her mother's sister as a role model, thinking that maybe she could have the fortune just like her aunt. Renee said some people thought she would do multiple marriages without divorcing, baby selling, incest, torture, and satanic rituals. Geraldine's niece stated she didn't find all this out at once because her aunt slowly revealed her dark secrets, and for that matter, her entire family. Renee was first approached around 18 years old by getting a phone call from her aunt at her mom and stepdad's place. Renee said her aunt wanted to meet with her to discuss something important. The only thing Geraldine would say over the phone was that she wanted her to ride up to New Jersey with her so that she could go to the bank. When she arrived at her niece's home, she said she wanted to go at night. Renee thought that was very strange that she wanted to go to a bank at night when most banks are closed. Renee said her aunt wanted to persuade one of the guys they spotted at one point on their drive to come with them. She said to tell the guy that the money would be good for both him and me. Lionel Robinson was the man Renee had to choose for their bizarre driving mission to New Jersey. On May 10, 1989, Parish, age 52, received sentencing for one of the most bizarre murders in Baltimore's history. Parish was accused of killing 48-year-old New Jersey resident Albert Robinson. She did so by recruiting 19-year-old Lionel Robinson, who had no relation to this victim, to pull the trigger on behalf of her orders. Also, she used her niece, Renee Burns, to lure the victim to his death. She told her niece that Albert was a tired, useless old man, who would be a great person to murder. She explained he would be easy prey and be unmissed by anyone that he knew. The niece discovered that her aunt became the first beneficiary of his life insurance policies. She added him to a list of people she could kill later for any needed future funds and collect their insurance. Another strategy she used was to marry her victims, so it was easier to collect their insurance money when she murdered them. Renee's stepfather stopped speaking with her because of the incident, but he wasn't the same guy who married her aunt for the money in New Jersey 15 years ago. She explained that her mother and stepfather never married because he is still legally married to Geraldine for 15 years while living with Renee's mother. Geraldine never came to the house while Renee's mother was still alive, and her mother died in 1987. Renee's aunt went to jail where her father was, and told him that Renee poisoned her own mother with orange juice, causing her death. Renee claimed that her stepfather wanted nothing to do with her. At one point, in a twist, local police searched inside Pauper Cemetery for one of Parish's victims, exhuming the wrong body twice. Since the trial, authorities have provided Renee a place to stay that no one has known about. Renee was forced upon herself to confess because she has a 16-month-old son that she needs to think about now. Jack Lesser of the state attorney's office would indict Renee Burns as a co-conspirator in the first Parish murder case. He declined to answer her placement in a state witness protection program or even the possibility of her being brought to testify. Also, he declined to answer if she would be indicted in the upcoming murder trials of Geraldine Parish. Renee was the 21-year-old niece at that time who exposed her aunt for being a voodoo widow murderess on April 22, 1989. On May 20, 1989, preacher Geraldine Parish, age 54, and gunman Edwin Gordon, age 23, pleaded guilty to killing 3 people. Also, they confessed to 3 attempted murders to collect on their insurance policies. Parish tried to get an insanity plea, but it failed, and she received 2 consecutive life sentences with an added 6 concurrent life sentences. Parish and Lionel Robinson were both sentenced to life plus 20 years in the insurance scheme murder of Albert Robinson. Gordon, already serving a life without parole for a separate murder contract, received 6 more concurrent life sentences. They deserve what was coming, and Parish for orchestrating 4 murders from November 1985 to May 1988 for $39,000 worth of insurance benefits. The victims were her friends, and her sister's husband was one of the victims. Other sources reported the police seized 45 insurance policies from the locked closets and safes at her house. Number 4. Raymont Hopewell, aka Money. Raymont Hopewell was born on June 11, 1971, and dropped out of high school by just the age of 15 when he was in his sophomore year. Hopewell had a troubled past, and this leads him to have killed his first woman, who was Constance Willis, when he was just 28 years old. He strangled the 60-year-old black female in her home, and her body was discovered by Cecilia Smith, who was her daughter. 2 years later, when Hopewell was 30, he was arrested for a drug possession with intent to sell and was released on a $5,000 bail. Soon after, he received another drug possession charge, and he was sentenced to 2 years of probation. This wasn't enough for Hopewell, and about a year later, he murdered another elderly black female named Sarah Shannon, who was 88 years old. Shannon was found bound and strangled in her bedroom at Green Hill Apartments on Violet Avenue. She had been raped, just like Hopewell's last victim. He was jailed for 18 months due to not fulfilling the conditions of his probation. He was released to a halfway house to complete his sentence. One day, he did not make curfew, and a fugitive warrant was issued. Hopewell's mother died of an intracranial hemorrhage. Hopewell found another elderly black female named Sadie Mack, who had been raped like the previous victims. 78-year-old Sadie was found with her wrists bounded with shoelaces and strangled to death in her West Baltimore home. A few months later, he found another older black female, Lydia Wingfield, aged 78. Lydia was raped and strangled like the previous victims in her longtime home. He broke into another elderly home of a 63-year-old woman, and she was attacked at knife point. He brought her into the basement where he bounded her hands with green ribbons and Taylor's measuring tape. He raped her also, but she was left alive. About a week later, he broke into a home to steal $150, though the residents were still home, so he knocked a 55-year-old woman over and cut a 61-year-old man with a knife. 2 days later, a 67-year-old woman, 80-year-old man, and 76-year-old woman were threatened with a knife and attacked in their Fernhill Avenue home. Finally, Hopewell's torment on the elderly had ended when he was arrested on September 20th and charged with the Crawford killing. Afterward, one of Wingfield's relatives was able to link Hopewell to her death, and 3 others were linked through DNA database hits. Number 3. Jason Thomas Scott, aka Mother-Daughter Killer. Scott had a bad history at the young age of 10, as he was a peeping Tom, recording people when they were asleep or undressing, said by a neighbor. Then it went from breaking and entering to stealing vehicles from unsuspecting victims. He is a bright young college grad pursuing a master's in computer science. WUSA reported that Scott was working for UPS to fund his own personal research to get access to records to identify victims. Authorities believe he used his computer skills to research police forensic tactics and possibly use his UPS database to study his alleged victims. His brutal crime began on January 26, 2009 in Prince George's County, Maryland, when he neutralized the Lofton's home alarm system and snuck inside. 45-year-old nurse Karen Lofton, who was living there, was fatally shot as she tried to hide in a corner while her daughter, named Carissa, aged 16, was repeatedly shot as she frantically dialed 911 from her bed. The police were dumbfounded on how he broke in because the doors were locked and there was no signs of forced entry. All the neighbors around her area were terrified of this event and were very aware of the situation they were all in. About 2 months later, on March 16th, the body of Dolores DeWitt, a 42-year-old nurse, and her 20-year-old daughter, Ebony, were found in a burning car less than a mile away from the Loftons' home. The car was stolen the same day their bodies were found. This was Scott's first victim in his year-long massacre of mothers and daughters of Maryland. Authorities wondered whether this was the work of a serial killer or one in the works. Scott went on and killed 3 more women in less than 12 months. It was said Scott engaged in 29 home burglaries, 9 home invasions, and the sexual assault of a minor throughout the years of his crimes. Scott was spotted by law enforcement and arrested in July 2009 in a UPS parking lot after the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives got a tip that he was selling weapons out of the trunk of his vehicle. They charged him with selling 14 stolen guns, which included pistols, assault weapons, silencers, and a machine gun. During this time, he remained in jail on weapons and carjacking charges. The investigation eventually led authorities to an old mansion that police believed served him as his own personal lair during his crime spree. They charged him with the mother-daughter killings of 5 women, with Vilma Butler, aged 46, being on that list. Jason Thomas Scott was sentenced to 97 years in prison on January 11, 2012, and another 85 years stacked on September 25, 2013, when charged with the rest of the murders. Number 2. Melvin David Rees Jr., aka the Sex Beast.
Little is known about Rees's childhood and teen years. Throughout the 1950s, Rees attended the University of Maryland in College Park, just outside of Washington, D.C. Some of his classmates recalled Rees as being a very talented musician, showing his skills with the saxophone, piano, and clarinet. He dropped out of UMD before he could graduate to pursue his musical career and traveled around the D.C. area playing jazz music at local nightclubs. On June 26, 1957, Margaret Harold and her boyfriend, who is a sergeant in the U.S. Army, were both on leave during the weekend and traveled near Annapolis, Maryland. Rees was driving his green Chrysler, crashing into the side of their car, forcing them off the road. He gestured at the couple to roll down the window to their car, showing a gun to intimidate them. After refusing his orders, he demanded cigarettes and money. He became furious because they were ignoring him, so he shot Harold in her face. Her boyfriend was terrified and fled after he shot her, running across several secluded fields before arriving at a farmhouse, where he called the police. He was picked up by authorities at the farmhouse, while the other officers arrived at the crime scene, where they found Harold's body. Her clothes were removed, and he sexually assaulted her lifeless body. Authorities searched for the unknown killer until they found an abandoned construction building. They soon noticed a basement window that was broken into, and while investigating the area, they discovered a series of violent, disturbing pornographic photos. Also, they found autopsy pictures of female corpses that were taped all over the walls. Police discovered a yearbook of Wanda Tipton, who was a 1945 graduate from the University of Maryland. Authorities managed to contact Tipton from the yearbook, and she denied knowing a tall, dark-haired man described by the soldier as Harold's killer. There were some leads, but forensic science was primitive in 1957, and Harold's murder became a cold case file until he murdered again 2 years later. On January 11, 1959, the Jackson family, being Carol Jackson, his wife, Mildred, and their infant daughters, Janet and Susan, disappeared after visiting family in the Apple Grove area. They were regarded as a normal family, who didn't have any enemies, which made their disappearance very shocking. They were driving along a dirt road in Virginia, returning home, when they were forced to stop, and Rees abducted them after having them at gunpoint. A female relative, who was driving home from the same Apple Grove reunion, saw Carol's abandoned vehicle on the side of the road.
She called authorities right after finding the vehicle and found no indications of any struggle in their vehicle. Authorities and others did a massive search for the missing family, but it wasn't very successful. Nearly 2 months later, on March 4th, 2 men cleaning up brush near Fredericksburg discovered a decomposing body of Carol Jackson in a ditch. He was shot in the back of the head, and his hands were tied behind his back. Upon recovery of his body, authorities discovered that he was dumped on his 18-month-old daughter, Janet. It was known that the child was still alive until her father's lifeless body suffocated her to death. Close to the end of the month, on March 21st, 1959, the bodies of the other family members were discovered in a forest near Fredericksburg. The 2 family members were Mildred and 5-year-old Susan, showing signs of torture and sexual assault. Mildred had been brutally raped in the same room where the pornographic images had been found 2 years earlier. Soon after the Jackson family incident, a local couple came forward reporting that a tall, dark-haired man followed them around in an old model blue Chevy, flashing his headlights while forcing them off the road. The suspect later got out of his car and attempted to approach the couple's vehicle, but they managed to flee the scene. Investigators on the case were certain that the same killer had committed the murders, and media jumped on the story immediately. Tips began to pour in. Even though most of the tips were worthless, an anonymous source, later identified as Glenn Moser, sent a letter to Fredericksburg authorities. The sender of the letter suggested investigating Rees, explaining that himself and Rees would go into heavy philosophical debates. In one of their conversations, Rees asked if murder could be considered right or wrong. Rees was under the influence of Benzedrine and told Moser that he considered murder just being another part of the human experience that he really wanted to take part in. Also, Rees stated you can't say it's wrong to kill, and it is the individual's standards to make it right or wrong. The conversation about this happened a day before the Jacksons disappeared, and after Moser heard about the murders months later, he suspected that Rees killed the family. He confronted Rees about the murders. Although he did not confess to the killings, Moser knew he was evasive to the questions he asked. In Moser's letter, he also mentioned his suspicion of Rees and Margaret Harold's murder in 1957, as they were working in the Annapolis area as salesmen during the time of the murders. Authorities decided to use this lead and questioned Rees, but he stated he had moved out of his house, leaving no forwarding address. Upon looking at a background check of Rees, police discovered that he attended the University of Maryland and dated Wanda Tipton. She was a person of interest in the Margaret Harold investigation, and upon questioning, Tipton admitted dating Rees but broke it off as Rees claimed to be married. With all these tips, they went to his home in West Memphis, Arkansas. Once in custody, an Army sergeant whose wife was killed by him recognized him right away. After police searched his home, they found a .38 revolver that was linked to the Jackson family killings. Also, they discovered cryptic notes describing murders. One of his notes said, "Drove to select area, killing the husband and baby daughter, and now the mother and daughter were all mine." He then wrote I tied and gagged her, leading her to a place where he hung her and described himself as being her master. Media dubbed Rees as the sex beast, and he was never able to explain why he committed the crimes that he did. In 1961, Rees was sentenced to life in prison in Maryland for the murder of Harold. The same year, Virginia added a death sentence for the 4 other murders, although it was reduced to life in 1972. Investigators suspected that Rees was responsible for the 4 brutal murders over the last 4 years of young women in the same area around the University of Maryland. 4 teenagers, Chalmette, Michael Ann Ryan, Mary Fellers, and Shelby Venable were all found raped and killed in separate incidents. He was never charged in any of the 4 other murders, and sometime in 1995, Melvin Rees died in prison after serving close to 3.5 decades behind bars. Number 1. Joe Roy Metheny. Have you ever heard of Sweeney Todd?
The story about a barber who killed and served his patrons from his barbershop to his customers of his restaurant. This is like that, and I used the movie as an example of Roy Metheny's life. Joe described that he is one of 6 children born into a poverty-struggled West Virginia family, and that he is a neglected child shuffled off to foster-like homes by his parents, who he claimed was dead. This is what Joe wanted others to think, although his mother stated he was raised in a supportive family. By the age of 6 years old, Joe's father was killed in a car accident in West Virginia, and the family took this hard, so his mother did everything to keep them together. She had to work several jobs to make ends meet, which included her waitressing, bartending, canteen and truck driving, and wished to have been with her children more during the financial pressures she now faced. In the future, at the young age of 18, Joe enlisted in the army and was stationed in Germany, where he would avoid contact with his mother for over 10 years. After this transition in his life, Joe was shipped off to the Vietnam War in an artillery unit where he claimed he grew an addiction to heroin. Up until this point, he had minor infractions with the law, but his record started down a much darker road. Soon after arriving back from the Vietnam War, Joe met his wife, who was soon to be the mother of his child, and had a drug problem which made their relationship unstable. While the relationship was unstable, Joe worked steadily to provide for his family as a truck driver because a child was in the picture. On July 1994, Joe was asked to work late one night, and when he arrived home, his partner and his 6-year-old son were missing. Joe found out that his wife was dating another man across town that he knew. She was prostituting herself and selling drugs for the new man in her life. Unfortunately, both got busted, and social services took their child away. Joe tried to gain custody for the child, but he was turned down. Joe was furious with this outcome and wanted to kill them for what they had done. Joe found out that the two later would meet under a bridge on a regular basis to get high. Joe went to their meeting spot to catch and kill them, but they were nowhere to be seen. He found 2 hobos who did drugs with his ex, so he killed the homeless men and cut them into pieces. After this incident, Joe had the thirst for blood again. The next victim he encountered was a woman he described as a crack whore. Joe was able to sway the woman with drugs to the same location he killed the homeless men. His point in meeting her was to find out information on his ex and her new partner. Joe got no information out of the woman after he had got her high and became enraged. He beat and raped the woman before killing her in cold blood. He then disposed the woman's corpse in some nearby bushes, and on the same night he would repeat the process. Now with him needing to dispose of another body, he decided to dump her lifeless corpse in the same bush he killed his first victim. As Joe was in the act of disposing the last body, he was spotted out by an older fisherman, so he decided to pick up a steel bar and bash the man's head wide open. Now that Joe has 5 bodies to get rid of, he decided to get rid of 3 of them in a nearby river, and the 2 homeless men in an unidentified location. At some point, Joe cut up the meat of the individuals, put them in some Tupperware bowls, and put them into his freezer. Over the next couple of weeks, during the weekends, he opened up a roadside open-pit beef stand. He had genuine roast beef and pork sandwiches, but he started to put human flesh in his ingredients because he thought they tasted very similar to pork. Apparently, Metheny planned to keep his business running, eliminating the weak drug addicts while filling the stomachs of his local patrons. Everything was going well until he ran out of his special meat, so he lured another woman into his trailer. He ripped off her clothes and knocked the hell out of her. Joe's mistake happened when he turned around for a split second, and she ran out of the door before he could get her. She scaled an 8-foot chain-link fence with barbed wire on the top while climbing up 10-foot-high pallets like a monkey. She jumped the fence and ran down the main road where she had some pedestrian and a pickup truck drive her to a nearby gas station where they called the cops on Joe. He was finally caught and charged with the murders of the 2 men he chopped up. He was in Baltimore City Jail for 18 months to go to trial, and the trial lasted about a week.
Metheny received an acquittal from the charges of the homeless men. Later, he was finally charged and confessed to killing up to 7 people, which consisted of 4 women and 3 men. After begging for the death penalty, Metheny was given the death sentence in 1998. However, the death sentence overturned, and he was instead given 2 life sentences. Joe died in jail mysteriously in 2017, and no one found out how he died, although they knew it was a planned murder. Thanks to those who watched all the way through the whole video, and new viewers who are joining us today. As always, be sure to subscribe for more content like this, and hit the bell icon at the top so you can be notified every time we post a video. Have a great day everyone, and for those who are victims to these killers, I hope you are well. See you guys in the next video, and thank you all for the added support. Peace out everyone.